Hi everyone, my name is Marcus and you're watching the Reef Nerd YouTube channel. Today is the 1 year anniversary of my tank, and I thought what a perfect opportunity to take a bit of a tour of my entire tank, the setup, the journey so far, and we can see what 12 months of reefing can really look like. So let's run through the equipment. To start with, most obviously, is the tank itself. I run a Neptunian Cube K90. This is a fantastic tank. It's a 3 foot wide, comes with an all acrylic stand and an all acrylic sump. The tank has a dual overflow, so there's an overflow at the top, which you can see pretty obviously, but there's also inlets to the weir at the bottom as well. I think this in part has helped keep my sand bed quite clean, and it provides great flow through the tank when you've got water coming out of the top and the bottom. My return pump is a max spec turbine duo. It's been great. Very reliable, comes with a cool controller so you can set it for a feed mode, turn it on and off quite easily and set the speeds that you want. The turbine duo does have dual outlets, which is quite a unique feature. I don't use it with dual outlets, I just use it with a single one, but if I ever need to run another manifold in my tank, I'll definitely be using the second outlet for that. For flow, I have two Powerheads in the tank. They're both gyres. The first is the max spec gyre XF230, and then the second is the Glamorca GP02. I believe they're both the same design for all intents and purposes, the Glamorca just being a cheaper unit with less features and a more basic controller. It's what I started with, and I got the max spec version second hand when I saw one up for sale and added that about 6 months ago. I really like the gyres. The flow that they can generate through the tank is outstanding, and it's very easy on the corals because it creates a wide sheet of water that can shoot across the top of the tank rather than a directed flow targeted in a specific spot that you need to make sure no coral is directly in the path of. My main filtration is provided by a Santa Monica Rain 2 algae turf scrubber. I would never run a tank without an algae scrubber or an algae reactor of some sort, and would strongly advise it to run from day one. As you'll see in some of the tank progression montage that I'll show you a bit later, my tank has never really had any algae issues. My secondary filtration is provided by a Quantum Nios 120. This skimmer has been pretty good for me. It's quite easy to service. If I could do it again, I'd probably get its bigger brother. I think it's the 160. Not so much because my tank needs that larger skimmer, but more because the cup in that larger skimmer has a drain port, which would allow me to remove one piece of maintenance in that I currently have to manually clean out and empty my skimmer cup. If it had a drain port, I wouldn't need to, I could run it to the drain. I also run about 20 small marine pure cubes, and I've just recently added 4 Mantis bio blocks in an acrylic holder. I am going to gradually remove the 20 small marine pure cubes because I'm finding that they are very fragile and prone to crumbling. I have one filter sock because my other overflow and filter sock holder is currently plumbed into the algae turf scrubber, but in that one filter sock that I'm running is about 50 grams of Roaphos for phosphate control. I change the filter sock about weekly, and I change the Roaphos when I do that as well. My auto top-off is handled by an Auto Aqua Smart AWC, which serves dual function as my ATO and also as an auto water change system. I did a review of this recently, so you can check that out in the link below. The auto water change is doing about 30 litres a week, or about 10% of my tank's total volume per week. Auto water changes are amazing, and I would recommend them to anyone. It's the single biggest upgrade you can give your tank in terms of stability and reduction of manual labor required for a reef tank. My current heater is an Aqua Manta Titanium 220 watt. I originally had a glass one from a brand that I've forgotten. It failed in under 6 months. So the lesson here is go with a titanium heater. They're more expensive, but I think they're more reliable. For dosing, I run Calcos, and I run it in an Avast Marine K1 calc stirrer, which is fed by a Coral Box WF01 Wi-Fi dosing pump. I did a review on that dosing pump, also linked below, and I currently dose 2,200 milliliters, that's 2.2 liters of Calcos per day. That's quite a lot for a tank of my size, and it is pushing how much I evaporate. I think I'm right on the limit on some days in terms of matching my evaporation. So in the future, I'll probably need to look for ways to either increase my evaporation or potentially add some more cool tech, like more dosing pumps or a calcium reactor or something else in the future to keep up with my tank's demands as they outstrip what Calcos can deliver. But for now, Calcos has been great for my tank. For those that don't know, Calcos is calcium hydroxide. It's a single additive that adds both alkalinity and calcium to your tank. The disadvantage with it is that it's nowhere near as potent as 2-part, and you can only add it up to the maximum daily amount of your evaporation. Otherwise, you'd be adding more liquid to your tank than you're taking out, and eventually it would overflow. I also manually dose 3 drops of the Coral Essentials Power Trace ABC range. That's the blue bottles that many people are familiar with from Coral Essentials. I'm not running their full range, just the ABC trace elements, and as I said, I dose 3 drops in my tank once a day. For lighting, up until now, I've run the Illumagic Blaze X90 LEDs. I also added a T5 strip by Key Lighting. It's the T5HO Enhanced Tube Bar, which holds 2 39-watt T5 tubes. For more information on those, I did a review of both the Illumagic Blaze and a review of the T5 Enhanced Tube Bar. Those are linked below. I say up until now because I'm about to make some pretty big changes to my lighting setup. No spoilers, so subscribe and you'll see what I'm about to do in a future video on my lighting enhancements. For feeding my tank, I have 3 different pellets that are mixed together in my auto feeder, which spins 3 times a day. The auto feeder is just a really cheap one that I got off eBay. I'll try and find a link and put that below, but I probably wouldn't recommend it. It's kind of janky. There are better ones on the market. Every morning I add a small square of nori to a clip for the tangs. Once a day I'll also manually add a pinch of flake food. I also add a cube of frozen food every day. I alternate between brine shrimp, mysis, and rotifers and lobster eggs. On the day that I feed rotifers and lobster eggs, I also add a 1/4 teaspoon of Reefroids and a 1/4 teaspoon of 100% Reef Safe's amino acid powder. And I consider that basically my coral feeding day, because I'll target feed using Julian's thing, all of the corals in the tank, that Reefroid, amino acid, rotifer and lobster egg mix. The fish get what goes into the water column, which is quite a lot, but I do target feed it to the corals primarily. On the days that I feed brine shrimp or mysis, I just drop the cube in the tank and let it melt, and the Powerheads blow it around. I find that's by far the best way to feed it. Gives the fish something to do as they chase the cube around the tank, and I've never been one to defrost my frozen food and drain it. I let the juice go into the tank because, as far as I'm concerned, that's coral food, and I've never had nutrient issues because my algae scrub is so effective. A couple of times a week, or whenever I want to really, I bring out a long acrylic tube and I feed Vitalis LPS pellets to my large LPS, like the acans and scollies. I find they really like being target fed large pellets like that, and it's also a fun way to interact with your tank. In terms of livestock in the tank, we have 2 clownfish by the names of Photon and Picasso. We have 1 blue tang by the name of Sky. We have 1 yellow tang, which we call Bubbles. We have 2 dispar Antheas who are yet to be named, so if you've got suggestions for what we should call our Antheas, post them in the comments below. I have 2 mandarins called Firefly and Serenity. I have 1 coral-banded shrimp who I call the bridge troll because he spends most of his time upside down in the bridge. We have 1 blood shrimp that I've called Aries, and we have 1 sand-sifting starfish. Yes, it's called Patrick. The cleanup crew consists of a bunch of Stomatella snails. They seem to breed in my tank, so I have no idea how many of them there are, but they're very effective algae eaters. I have 2 Nassarius snails, 1 Strombus snail, and the starfish Patrick. So at the 1 year mark, it hasn't been all perfect smooth sailing, so let's go through a few of the challenges that we've faced in the journey so far. Sometime in June 2018, I had an ick outbreak. One of my original fish, I believe it was a yellow tang, I introduced to the tank and it came with ick, I believe. I did not quarantine any of my new fish originally, and as a result of this outbreak, I lost my original yellow tang, 2 clownfish that I had at the time, and a royal Brahma. The only survivor was my blue tang Sky, who's still in the tank today. I dealt with this outbreak by removing the fish, placing them into a quarantine tank, which just consisted of a 50-litre plastic tub on the floor, and treating them with copper. Following the copper treatment, I ran 2 rounds of tank transfer method. For those not familiar with the tank transfer method, it's a 12-day cycle of moving the fish to a completely new setup. That setup can consist of nothing more than a plastic tub and an air stone, but you have to move them to a completely new setup every 3 days. So that's 4 transfers over every 3 days for 12 days. I did this twice, so I did 24 days of tank transfer method after a full round of copper treatment. But it was effective, and as a result of this quarantine method, and then running this tank 90 days fallow, so Sky lived in a plastic tub for the remaining 70 odd days after all of that quarantine, I did eradicate ick from my system and from my surviving fish. The lesson here is to quarantine your fish, not an experience that I want to go through again. Quarantine your fish is the advice that I can give to anyone in this hobby. I know it's a pain, but absolutely do it. I had a bit of a false start with SPS, so around August through the end of October 2018, I started introducing SPS into the tank. While initially they seemed okay, over the next 2 months I lost most of them. Looking back now, I realized that the tank was not yet stable and there were a few parameter swings. The lighting at the time was mostly LED and probably not on the right spectrum settings, and the flow was less than ideal as I was only running the Glamorca gyre at the time. The overall maturity was not yet there for SPS in my tank. In November, I added some more hardy SPS such as bird's nests, Stylopora and pokies, also some of the more easy Montipora, and in December and January I started adding more acros and digis. As of today, none of this second round of SPS that I just mentioned that I started adding from November onwards has died. It's all in fact done really well. So this is a good indicator that my tank is mature and stable enough for SPS. The addition of the T5, the more flow with the additional max spec gyre, the more stable dosing and overall maturity of my tank appears to have been key here. And I know none of that is really specific advice, it's more of just do everything better and have everything stable and making sure your tank is older. But really with SPS, I think that is the best advice. Patience is key. In November 2018, I suffered a heater failure. Luckily, I caught this pretty early. My original glass heater had started getting condensation inside the glass, and ultimately this led to it failing totally. It just refused to turn on and was completely dead. At the time in Melbourne, it was quite warm, so it wasn't catastrophic for the tank. I've since replaced it with the Aquamanta titanium heater, which has been much better and comes with a much more robust thermometer and temperature setting controller. So the lesson learned here is don't cheap out on heaters or have redundant heaters. In April 2019, so we're now talking last month, I had a bit of a cyano outbreak on my sand bed. I believe the cause for this was my phosphates were creeping up. They got over 0.1 part per million. And with my nitrates being so low, they generally hover around 1 part per million. That puts my nitrate to phosphate balance quite out of what the recommended limits should be. Generally, the lower you keep your nitrate, the lower you need to keep your phosphate. And so, given that I hadn't changed anything else really with my tank, all my other parameters were fine, all the equipment had been pretty stable, it's my guess that that was the cause of the cyano outbreak. We'll never really know, but whilst there is still a small amount of it present, I have largely eliminated it from the tank, and it appears to be almost back to where it was with a pristine white sand bed. The way I dealt with it was not by overreacting. I didn't go and run all kinds of chemicals. I didn't change anything drastically. All I did was just gradually lower my phosphate back down to a reasonable level. I shoot for about 0.03 or 0.02, around that range, given how low my nitrates are. And so the only thing I did to lower my phosphates was running some Roaphos in a filter sock. not even in a reactor. And I just ran 50 grams of it in a filter sock, and I changed that out once a week. That was all it needed. I've lowered my phosphates back down, and it seems that the cyano has largely disappeared. It has been about a month that I've been fighting it, but when I say fighting it, it's just been waiting for it to run its course and lowering my phosphates back down to where they need to be. So that brings us to May 2019. The tank is now 1 year old. This YouTube channel is 3 months old, and we're about to hit 100 subscribers, so that's pretty cool. I'm going to finish up this video by leaving you with a montage of monthly full tank shots that I've taken, so we can see the evolution of my tank over the last year. I hope you enjoy that, as well as the rest of the B-roll footage that you've been watching through this video and that I'll leave you with for the next few minutes. Thanks for coming on this journey with me. Don't forget to subscribe. You've been watching the Reef Nerd YouTube channel, and my name is Marcus. Bye for now.